Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us from every part of the world. This is the World Kid Late Live, where series of virtual discussions on global Kid Late have been discussed. If you're familiar with World Kid Late, and you can check their Facebook page, you'll see that they've done some discussions on Arab Lit, European Lit, and many more. And today, um, the sun is shining on Africa. And with me on this panel, I have three powerful literary enthusiasts on this panel with me. And together in the next 1 hour, we'll be on a journey into African Kid Lit and Africa's many languages. One after the other, I'll be introducing my panelists. And the first person I have here is Sandra Tameli. Sandra Tameli was born in Pemba, Mozambique, and moved to Maputo in the early 1980s with her parents to attend better schools in the capital. She has a degree in architecture from the Mozambican Eduardo Mondlane University, but for many unfortunate reasons, decided not to pursue the profession and got a diploma in translation from the Institute of Linguist Educational Trust, UK. When she started translating in 2002 and in 2004, she established herself as a language services provider. She speaks Portuguese, English, and Italian. She is also learning German, Mandarin, and Mozambican Sign Language. In 2007, she made history by becoming the first Mozambican to translate and publish literature with the translation of Nicolo Amanati's novel into Portuguese. From 2010, she attempted to raise the profile of translators and their work in order to engage philanthropic initiatives to promote literary translation and the profession in Mozambique, including drafting and organizing the literary translation competition to celebrate International Translation Day from 2015, and also the promotion and sponsorship of the establishment of the Mozambican Translators and Interpreters Association in 2016. In addition, she is committed to translating young Mozambican authors into English, trying to make new voices in Mozambican contemporary literature known overseas. In 2018, she established Editora Trinta Zero Nove, the first Mozambican publisher dedicated to literary translation with the aim of giving stories a voice and providing young Mozambican women with relatable, inspiring stories. It doesn't come as a surprise when in 2021, she emerged as the winner of the London Book Fair International Excellence Award for Literary Translation Initiative. Welcome, Sandra.
Hello, Ayò. Thank you so much for your kind words. It's amazing to hear my biography like that. It's like I'm so proud of that person. I don't know who she is.
I was actually thrilled and wowed as I was reading about everything you've done. It's actually amazing to see writers from the continent being dedicated to children translation, which is something that is not so common here in Nigeria, where I come from. So I'm really impressed. Welcome.
Thank you.
The next person I have on my panel is Edwige Renée Dro. This is someone that I actually admire works from a distance. So let me read her bio in a minute. Edwige Renée Dro is a writer, literary translator, and literary activist from Côte d'Ivoire, whose writings have been published at HarperCollins, Mirad Editions, Bloomsbury, among others. She is the co-founder of Abidjan Lit, a collective that seeks to put books at the center of lives and at the heart of cities. Other literary ventures with which she has been involved include Jalada, Writivism, and the Afro Young Adult project, of which she was a facilitator and the French translator of the stories selected for the anthology. It doesn't come as a surprise when she was awarded a Moreland Writing Scholarship in 2018, and she will be a resident at the Iowa International Writing Program in 2021. In March 2020, she set up 1949, the Library of Women's Writing from Africa and the Black World in Abidjan. The mission of the library is to unearth and amplify the contributions of Black and African women in order to inspire present and future generations. You're welcome, Renée.
Thank you, Ayò. Thank you so much.
I like what you've done. I like what you've contributed to, and it's really cool and amazing to see women championing literature and pushing the narrative forward so that our voices can be heard across the world. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And the last person on the panel that I have here is Christian Elongué. He is an author and researcher. Dismayed by a lack of Black characters in books available to African children, Elongué founded munakalati.org in 2017 with the goal of building international recognition for African children's book authors and increasing access to African children's books. In 2019, he authored an introduction to children's literature in Cameroon, the first ever survey of the children's book industry in Cameroon. Prior to that, he worked with the French National Center for Children's Literature as a founding member of International Board of Book for Young People in Cameroon. He has also spent several years developing literacy and educational initiatives as a means of empowering children in West Africa. You're welcome, Christine.
Thank you. In Ghana, we say medase.
Medase. I've been to Ghana a couple of times, and I think it's actually a small but amazing country and very organized too.
Yeah.
Coming from a Nigerian.
Coming from a Nigerian.
Small compared to
So welcome to everyone that is joining us on this panel. For clarity, most of the panelists I have here are from West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and East Africa. And together we'll be looking at the topic, African Kidlits and Africa's many languages. Interestingly, I come from Nigeria, which is known as the most populous Black country on the continent. And the interesting part is Nigeria has over 300 ethnic groups, which means that we also have over 300 ethnic languages. And I'm Yoruba, and in Yoruba language, children are called, or kids are called, Omode. So I want Sandra to tell me about our native language and what you call kids in your native language.
Okay, it may come as a shock for you, but my native language is Portuguese because I was born to parents from a different tribe. So my father is from the south, he's Mashangan, and my mother is from the north, she's Kimwan. They are both from a small, from languages with a small number of speakers. So in Mozambique, we have 43 languages. So we have 41 Bantu languages, Portuguese, that's the official language. And then we have Mozambican Sign Language. So we have 43 languages in total. And there are 43 different ways of calling children, from crianças to Abantuana, and Jingritana. So it's a rich country, and I think that it's not exclusive to Nigeria or any other Central or Eastern African countries. I believe that Africa is this myriad of languages, of cultural groups, of ethnicities, but we are all together, and I believe that we have our role to play in making these stories available to all kids, regardless of what language they speak.
Fantastic. Edwige, what do you say to that? What about your native language, and what do you call kids in your native language?
You know, the question of native language, I always say that the language my parents speak, that I speak, is Yakuba. You know, Côte d'Ivoire has 63 languages. So my parents speak Yakuba. I speak Yakuba also very well. So in Yakuba, you call a kid na. But I identify with Bambara because I spent 10 years of my life in the north of the country from the age of 0 until 10, obviously. So in Bambara, a kid is called Deni.
Cool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's interesting. Kristen, I believe you have a native language, and I believe it's going to sound different in my ears. So tell me about it.
Yeah. So in Cameroon, basically we have over 300 language, 300 indigenous languages. And in the name of the organization that I represent, Muna Karate, we have Muna. Muna in Douala means a child. A child. It means a child. So basically, to say a child, you say Muna. And Kalati means like reading or a book, basically. So aside the Sawa language, we also have Pidgin English that is very popular. And to say child in Pidgin English, we say Pekin, because I'll be coming forward more about that, because I sincerely believe that blended languages could be a key to promoting bilingual publishing.
Fantastic, fantastic. I'm really enjoying this session. One of the things I could remember as a child is my dad is a learned man, so he would compel us to speak English. Definitely, we went to good school, my brother and I, and but my mom would ensure that she speaks our native language to us, and would wonder like, why would you make us speak our native language? Because in school, it's known as vernacular, which means you don't speak vernacular, you know. And she'd be like, that's our culture, that's our roots. And whenever she told me any story from our own childhood or from folk stories, she would ensure that she told me those stories in my native language. So it was a mix of both growing up, hearing your native language, enjoying that native language, and also learning the English language and letting both of them to form the understanding of how I see the world today. So I'm going to start with you, Kristen. How has your native language influenced how you see the world today?
Yes, so my native language has highly influenced how I see the world today. Basically, at the level of the fact that, you know, I've been groomed into a society where local languages are highly valued, especially in Cameroon. So when growing, my grandmother used to speak the local language with me. She was using it to give me instruction, and also, even though at school I was learning into an official language, which was French. So it has shaped my understanding in the sense that it really helped me to stay connected with my roots. It really helped me in being more ethnically grounded into the country, because it is through your local language that you are able to differentiate yourself from the others, while also belonging to the community in which you are living. So that's how basically my native language has shaped my education and my growing up ages.
Fantastic. Edwige, what's your take on this?
You know, on a question of native language, because I grew up in the north of the country, first of all, Yakuba, I think we represent 5 to 10% of the population of Côte d'Ivoire, so we are not a lot. Then I grew up in the north of the country, where Bambara was the language that is predominantly spoken. And also Bambara is predominantly spoken in the whole of Côte d'Ivoire because it is a language of trade. I did not learn to speak French until I was about 5. So when I went to school, because at home, my parents spoke Yakuba. My father was a mathematics teacher and everything. My mother spoke Yakuba. It wasn't, I don't think it was done it was just the language we spoke at home, full stop. But of course, we also spoke Bambara because we were living in a Bambara community. And it was a language that we had to speak even on a subconscious level to be accepted. So for me, language, I do not attach I attach a political dimension to language, but not something that I use to identify as part of the community. Like I mentioned earlier on, I do not for me, being a Yakuba has no weight for me. It doesn't, I'm not going to say like, I'm proud of being Yakuba, because it doesn't mean anything for me. I did not grow up in that region. I just speak the language because my parents speak the language, my grandparents speak the language, but I will identify as a Bambara, and I will, so when I go to the market, I look like somebody who doesn't speak any language. So when I speak Bambara to the market women, they're like, oh, she's one of ours. So I get good prices, I get good conversations, I get everything. So for me, language is a way of opening up to other people, as opposed to, knowing where I am from. I know where I'm from.
Fantastic. Language is a way of opening up to other people. What do you think, Sandra? What's your take on that?
Speaking a colonial language as my mother tongue, I grew up with a lack because I remember my mom telling me stories. I can even sing in a mother tongue, but I don't have a clue what I'm singing. I can also sing in my my dad's mother tongue, that's Shangana, because I heard that that's the language I used to communicate with both my grandmothers. So what happened is I grew up with this anger, this thirst for language assimilation, and assimilation is a factor that is present here because I'm considered an assimilado because I speak Portuguese as a mother tongue. So I tended to assimilate another European languages because they are easier to learn. You have manuals, you have dictionaries, as opposed to our local languages that are not in written format. They are more based on oral tradition. So that's where I am now. So I am in a limbo. Am I truly Mozambican? Am I enough Mozambican enough? Am I African enough? So maybe that's the questioning that made me pursue a career in translation and interpreting.
That's really interesting. That brings a question to my mind. Like, there's something we can all see from what we've said, which is Africa. Most of the countries have multiple languages, but there's something that Nigeria did as a nation, which is fine. We have over 200 languages, but we chose like 4 basic languages aside the lingua franca, which is English. Then we have the Hausa, then we have the Igbo language, and we have the Yoruba language. So it's not like an attempt to suppress other languages, but it's like most other languages stem from these 3 major languages. And for example, most of our writers today, they try to, when they're translating their works across the country, they try to translate it into Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo. So back to you, Sandra. What has been the shifts in your own country from your own experience? Like, how many languages and which of these languages actually drive the narrative and the content that are available to kids in your country?
Well, that's debatable because everyone, as I said, we have 41 different languages. But the thing is, Mozambicans are about 30 millions now, but only 26% speak Makua. That's the language with more speakers. And but there are not many content that is generated in Makua. I believe that the only book that has been translated in all of the Mozambican languages, the Bible, of course. That's a great work that was done by the missionaries here. But
That read and speaks French, so that is literate in French. You have 70% of the population that can understand French. But it's not when I always say like French, it's not the French, that you will be speaking in Paris or whatever. I always say this like on panels, the same way we have English and Englishes, in the same way we have French and Frenchies. So we speak one of the Frenchies in Côte d'Ivoire. Now, with regards to national, local languages, I don't even like the term local languages, and I don't even like the term colonial languages. I really don't. Yes, I know. I really do not feel that when I am speaking English, like I even am now, I am speaking a colonial language. I think my English, as Chinua Achebe said, I have done things with the English language, and the Ivorians have done things with the French language. So we have removed the colonialism, out of it. I think we should own these languages as our own just because I come from this particular, country. So there are so obviously, like Sandra was saying earlier on, you do not have like, written forms of these languages. And so writing it, I mean, you have some writers who are writing children's stories in Bete, in Baoulé. Bete is from the crew, the big crew group. Baoulé is from the big Akan group. But they are not getting big sales because people cannot read it, but they could, they can, understand it. Maybe not children of 6, 7 living in urban areas because they are speaking French. But maybe children in less urban, in more rural areas, but where the books are not going there also, whether in a written form or whether in an audio form. So maybe as the discussion goes on, we will, we'll touch upon that.
Wow, that was detailed. That's very detailed. Kristen, what do you think? Do you have national languages, and how do you use that to control and educate kids in their learning?
Yes, so as I said, we effectively have over 300 local or non-national languages in Cameroon. Most of them, some of them have a higher visibility depending on the region in which they are being spoken. So in general, we have 10 regions in Cameroon. In each region, we have kind of main languages. For example, if you go into the littoral region, you will hear languages such as Sawa, Douala, and all that. If you go into other regions, you will see that the main languages are different. But in terms of language diversity, it is very rich. But those languages are, however, they're not being used into the educational system because, as Edwige has said, the situation in Ivory Coast is not that different from what we have in Cameroon, where the foreign or official languages are more promoted than the national languages. There are many, especially the kids of the new generation who are growing up and they are not being instructed in local languages at all, even at home. Usually in the past, when you are growing up, your mother will be speaking the local language to you at home. But nowadays, language as English or French, they are seen more as language of privilege, of access to opportunities. So there are many kids who are growing up now who are not having the possibility of speaking at least one local language. They just know either French or English. They don't know any local language at all. In the school also, those languages are not being taught. It is true that we have organizations such as the National Association for the Promotion of Local Languages, which has been advocating to have the inclusion of local languages within the school curriculum. And one of the language policy that they have suggested, for example, was the fact that it would be important that in each region, the local language dominant in that region is being used for instruction into the education system, but this policy has not been taken over by the government, and there are a lot of division over which language must be used for national education in indigenous languages. So there is a lot of division about the issue, but in general, more kids are growing up without having at least one indigenous languages that they are mastering perfectly as our generation. And this is very sad in the sense that it leads to more, youth who are growing without a strong cultural identity. They can't really know where they are standing. Whenever they are going out or whenever they are speaking with others, when you switch to a local language, they cannot relate. And this has also affected our generation, the fact that we have a diversity of languages. In general, whenever you see Cameroonians outside the diaspora, it is difficult, except they come from the same region, it might be difficult for them to relate. We don't have a transnational language, for example, as Swahili or probably Hausa that many are speaking. Or for example, if you go in Senegal, even though they have many national languages, they have chosen one that they have promoted across the country, Wolof. In Cameroon, we don't have that. We have more small languages that have been promoted to a certain level, but we don't have one that has been taken to direct, the flow of national speaking. So this is very sad. And we sincerely hope that as things move on, the government will develop more policy and support to increase the use of local languages in the country.
Wow, wow, wow. You said a lot. And I totally agree with you. I can tell you for a fact that some of my friends that also grew up, let's say in the UK, in the US, they're also Nigerians, let's say Yoruba like me. And when I'm speaking, let's say I'm speaking English now, I can easily code switch to my native language and continue the conversation. So whenever I do that, they will be like, how did you do that? And it's like, I just created fire. So I'm always wondering, like, why are we having that kind of difficulty? We shouldn't be having that kind of difficulty. You have a native language, or maybe you have native languages. At least you should be able to speak one fluently and communicate with it. And it's a discussion based on identity. It brings you home, you know. So in that line, today we are in that digital age. What do you think we can do in this our own field, which has to do with children's literature? What can we do to make children embrace their language and their identity?
May I jump in on this question of identity and privilege that Christian mentioned? I think maybe if my parents, I mean, okay, they did not speak French at home, but people of my parents' generation, they wanted maybe to speak French to their children because, yeah, they were coming from a position of privilege, or they wanted to speak the language of privilege. At least this was the mood in the 70s, 80s in Côte d'Ivoire. But I really do not think that today, or maybe that is the reason why people my age, most of them do not speak their mother or their father's tongue, for that matter. But I do not think that today, for those of us raising children today, it is a question of privilege. It's just a question of capitalism. We are busy. And talking of cultural identity, I really don't think that if we're not speaking our languages, that doesn't mean that we do not have a strong cultural identity. I think, like, even when I'm in the UK, or when I am in Ghana, or when I'm in Togo, and I hear an Ivorian person speaking French, I know this is an Ivorian. I identify. It doesn't need to be speaking Baule or Yakuba for me to say, yeah, my person. No, by the way that he speaks French, I know that this is my person, you know, because he's using French in ways that, you know, so we have a strong cultural identity with that. And that is why I'm really not so, you know, keen on the whole national language, local language, you know, to build cultural identity. But in the age of, you know, in the age of digital, obviously, for me, what we are calling local languages, national languages, they are our, you know, cultural capital. Okay, they are our cultural capital. It is something that gives us weight also in the world. And, you know, and I think this is this is the reason maybe why we should be teaching our language. But for that, to our children, but for that to happen, we need to be having the schools where they are learning these languages. We need to be having national policies. These languages need to have an orthography. And it's not just us, a bunch of writers sitting there, who are going to be, changing that. So that goes at a much higher level.
Wow, wow, you said a lot. And I'm going to take you on what you said earlier, which is more about the phrase you made to Chinua Achebe, whereby you take the language, then you hold the language. So it's our language. That's really interesting. And I totally agree with you. If you're just joining us, this is What Kid Lit Live, and we are discussing African Kid Lit and Africa's many languages. If you have questions, please drop it in the comment section. And in the next 15 minutes, we'll be taking the questions. So please drop your questions. You need clarifications on something, you want to disagree with the panelists, feel free, drop in the questions and they'll be ready to take it on. So, so I'm still going to stay with you, Edwige, which is, okay, I understand what you're trying to say, but let's look at it this way. How can the African children see themselves in the book they read? Let me put that question that way. What should writers, publishers on the continent do? How can we help the African children see themselves in the stories that they're reading?
And that I am totally on with you. So, it doesn't help writing, some local language, and then this child is in a village somewhere. I think sometimes, like, with sometimes when people talk about, at least here in Côte d'Ivoire anyway, when people are talking about like children's literature, or, kids reading the literature, they go down to the fables, with the, children sitting down with their grandmothers in a village, around the fire and everything. Well, maybe I did that, but you know what? My daughter's grandmother lives in Abidjan, which is an urban area of 4 million people. The woman has electricity in her home. This woman is not sitting down around any fire to be talking to a granddaughter. So, so they need to portray the reality of my daughter, who she's an urban child. She just wants to run. So it doesn't need to be. That's why I love the stories by Margaret Abui, who is a compatriot. The Akisi series. The Akisi series is just about a little girl who is just, getting up to mischief, who is not being punished by it. So she will get up and go on, on a plane and go to the toilet and fill up the toilet stuff so that it, erupts, or she will go to see parents in the village, or she will take the coach to see, other places. So I want to see those stories that make children laugh, that are not propagandist. So because I'm seeing some stories recently where they're like, yeah, the little girl with her hair that she's really proud of. Maybe if that little girl lives in Europe, because here in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, she does not care about her hair that she's really proud of. She's like Akisi. She's going to see people in the town next door. She's taking the plane. She wants to go to the toilet on a plane because, yes, children today, they are not like me who only got on a plane in their 20s. They are getting on planes, when they are 4, when they are 5. So let's, show that reality for them. Let's just not put them all the time in a village, with no electricity.
Fantastic, fantastic. You've said a lot, but I know you've not said everything. Sandra, what's your take on this? How can we help our children to see themselves in the story they read? You're a publisher, so what's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I have to agree with Edwige. I love Akisi. I met Margarita Boe in 2015, and we have translated Akisi into Portuguese and Makua. So Akisi is one of the stories that I'm very proud to have in my catalog, and I wish to purchase the entire collection because she's very relevant. And regarding the digital, it was our savior, like it was our light at the end of the tunnel this year, the past 2 years, because we were unable to hold any book launches. That's when we managed to get more sales. We are now under constraints. We have to close shops early. So going digital is a must right now for any publisher, and I think that that's something that us as African publishers, we have to jump in and we have to own that space. It's something that Editora 3009 has been doing. We are trying different ways of sharing our books and our children's book, particularly with children. We did an experiment last, I think 2 weeks ago, that we picked a book, a picture book, and we adapted it into a video. So you have a mix of the print book, the illustrations, the narration, because we publish audiobooks. And we also incorporated a video with sign language interpreting. So we have one book in 3 different formats, because inclusivity is something that we have in mind. True that in Mozambique, not most children have, not many children have access to internet. Internet is still expensive, but it's something that we have to take into account, that it's not like Africa is going to leapfrog. It's happening, this digital inclusion. So it's we must, as independent publishers, include and have this in mind. And when we are talking about publishing into local languages, it is important to also share this content in the digital platforms. Like if people are using WhatsApp, so adapt our books to be shared in WhatsApp too, because like Edwige said, most children, they can recognize the audio of their language, their mother tongue, but they cannot read it. So by mixing these two formats in our video that we shared on YouTube, maybe that's the way forward. So digital, we have to jump in, definitely.
That's fantastic. And I'll just chip it in here that there is that narrative where people actually think, people in the Western world actually think that probably Africa doesn't even have internet or Africa doesn't have light. I want you guys to know that we have internet, there's light, we work with apps, and we already kind of mixing it with our work, our daily lives. With digital people, we are digitized, and most of the things we do today are actually digitized, and we are just part of the rest of the world. We might not be as forward out there, but definitely we're catching on, and we're catching on very good. Kristen, I'm so sorry that we had to cut you off the other time, so I'm going to come back to you. I know you have a lot to say, so I'll give you the floor. So tell me, talk about how you think that African children can see themselves in the literatures they read, based on your research, based on your experience, and what all these things, what they mean to you in total. So over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thank you, Ayò. So I think there are various ways of doing that. The first being at the level of the story that are being narrated. Those stories must be culturally relevant, be related to what the child is actually going through. Those stories must answer to some of the questions that a child may ask himself. So I think that that's one key element, that we need more culturally relevant story. And I think Edwige has addressed that. And this is something key, because nowadays we have a lot of issues in Africa that are happening because I sincerely believe that we haven't produced or educated our children enough about our history, about our environment. For example, I remember when I was growing up as a kid, I read a lot of Sixtou Géant, of Black Leroy, Zembla, Rodeo, and a lot of those cartoons, you know, and comics. And what they think that it had on my education is that even though I was in Cameroon, I knew more about France history. I knew more about the history of foreign nations than about my own country. And I sincerely believe that if we want to reduce immigration, clandestine immigration, we need to control the amount of cultural content coming from other countries that we are allowing our kids or our children to have access to. Because when someone is growing up with, you know, Blanche Neige, you know, with Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, with all those stories, their mind is already shaped to go and see those places, to go and live into those places, you know, and as they are growing, they will be more enthusiastic in going into a place that they have read already. So I believe that one way is at the level of the story. Let's ensure that the stories that are being produced are culturally relevant, are aligned with the vision of the country, you know, vision of the country. For example, when you see in the US, after the Great Recession, the type of books that were being produced were shaping the mindset of citizens to look towards a specific direction, you know. So we need to look at the level of the story. The second element is about giving opportunity to youth to also publish stories about themselves. Usually, the funny thing about children's literature is that it's mostly adults who are writing about children, you know.
True.
We don't need to lose Christian now. He's saying some great things.
We have very few things going through that. The way a child writes about himself. Did you get me, please?
We are getting you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I was giving the second point that we need to have more children or youth to publish or to write about their own story, because the perspective in those stories will be highly different. The way you write as an adult about your childhood or about experiences of kids will be different from the way that the kids will narrate his own experience. And for example, there is Stacey Fru. She is a Cameroonian, and she's also in South Africa, and she has been producing many books about her own experience, and they have been well received by the majority of kids who have been reading those books, because the language that is being used, the perspective that is being portrayed is aligned with their realities. And the third element is that if we really want to have kids more into the books that, you know, that they are reading, we also need to take their voice in, also need to make those books available, because sometimes even when we are doing it, those books are not available to the kids. So those are some of the few actions that I believe will lead to a more relevant, children books that we have for those who are currently reading and growing up.
Fantastic, fantastic. We've taken so much time. So I have a question for you, Kristen, and I want you to answer the question in minutes. When I went through your bio and some of the things you've said earlier, I noticed that you made it clear that there's this scarce availability of books in local languages. So I want to know what are the consequences of this shortage, and what can we do to set things right on the continent?
Yeah, the fact that we have a scarcity of books in local languages is the consequence of a lack of policy around local language publishing, because it is the policy that will set the global framework under which the publishers, the authors, and anyone who is working in the book industry is going to function with. So I believe that one of the key elements is the fact that first, most African language, are not having a typography system. So sometimes publishers may face difficulties at the level of printing or even, typing those languages. Not all African languages, especially the minority languages, are not having a proper typography system. The second other challenge is the fact that, there is a lack of incentive. Most governments are not providing support, to encourage publishers to invest into children book publishing in local languages. And whenever a publisher is about to invest into it, he's thinking, am I going to have enough readership? Am I going to have a return on investment? Because when you publish a book in an African language, it means that except those who are able to read that language will usually buy it. So when we have a globalization system in which local languages or indigenous languages are not that promoted, so it makes the publisher to kind of think twice. The third element is at the level of the author. The author will realize that usually publishing in an African language is like being blind from international market, like being marginalized. It's like you choose yourself to be marginalized, except you are strongly motivated as a Boogie Wachongo, to go into that journey. There are very few who will go into it because there are actually in Africa very few prizes that are being awarded to African publishers who are publishing in African indigenous language. And it is very funny that we notice that we have a lot of prizes promoting African languages, but written in foreign languages. Promoting African literature, but written in foreign languages. How can we promote African literature written in a different language than African indigenous language? So it's kind of funny, but we really need, to have more incentive mechanisms, to have more support mechanisms, to encourage authors, publishers, and readers, to invest in that. And all of this goes back to the policy at the political level. Political leaders need to take decisions, need to make the resources available. But this will not come if the African population are not pushing that forward, if they are not, advocating for a greater use, for a greater promotion and use of local languages, because we are missing a lot by not doing that.
Fantastic, fantastic. I know Sandra and Edwige have a lot to contribute on that, but because of our time, I have a question directed
we need
at
3
Sandra.
hours.
Exactly, we need like 3 hours. But our time is fast spent. So Sandra, I have this question for you, and I want you to please answer it in a minute. As the first Mozambican publisher dedicated to literary translation, how does your commitment as a translator help to bridge the gap between kidlit on the continent and the rest of the world? In a minute, please.
It is paramount. I'm still a learner publisher. I've been translating for years, but as a publisher, I'm still learning, and the learning curve is steep. So I believe that our role is key, because for instance, Mozambique is an island, a Portuguese-speaking island surrounded by English-speaking countries. We do share some of the Bantu languages, but apart from that, or in spite of that, we don't see any circulation of literature, either for kids or for adults. So we don't know what the literary scene in South Africa or in Zambia or Zimbabwe is. So that's a shame, and we are losing on all that potential. So by jumping in as the first publisher dedicated to translation, we are bringing all these authors, we are bringing all these books. For instance, I have right here a book that we brought from Morocco. So it's now available in Portuguese. You can see, yes, Sabes o que eu vejo, in Sena, the same book, in Makua, and in Xangana. So that's what we are doing. But like Christian said, without incentives, without grants, without public funding, it's impossible. I'm running on my own funds. So that's a part that needs to be addressed too. So I'm here, I have the tools, I have a team. So I'm prepared to embrace Africa and the world and bring all these kids' books to our kids in my community, because they need this. I agree with you that sometimes we have tales like Little Red Riding Hood, Capuchinho Vermelho in Portuguese, but I think it's important that a kid now that is 6 or 7, because they don't know those stories anymore. My generation knew them. So it's important that we use their local language, but they are able to read the entire world. The entire world, okay, we can select, like Edwige did, tales by African authors or tales by Black authors, but we have to take into consideration that Africa is not all Black. Africa is not all Bantu languages. We have too many ramifications, so we have to embrace all this diversity. And I believe that it's important that we have translators willing to do this job of trying to find new voices and giving them a voice in translation in their territory.
That's fabulous, and well done with all you've done and all you're doing. I'm really impressed. On behalf of Renée, I want you guys to look at this book. This Water Birds on the Lakeshore. It's an Afro Young Adult anthology, and Edwige Renée Dro actually worked on this book. She translated it into French. I'm correct, right, Renée?
Yes, you are correct.
That's impressive. So I have a question for you, and I would be glad if you can respond in a minute. It is so that your bio gives a clear view into the multiple contributions you made in the literary scene, both for children and adults. How can contributions by African women in the literary space influence African kid lit? Yeah, let's be that way.
Well, I don't know how the African women can influence kids lit. You know, when I set up 1949, it was because I was not, you know, I wanted the African women and the Black women writers. I wanted to hear what they had to say about their own selves, not what some African man was going to write, you know, a la Camara, like his beautiful mother. I want his beautiful mother to speak for herself. But Christian mentioned that thing about, and this is what we do at the library. Christian mentioned that thing about, growing audience, and why is it that, we need to write in these foreign languages, and, when you choose to write in your local language, you are choosing to marginalize yourself. It is, I think we need to be building our audience on a continent. We have an audience on a continent. People are not buying books out of some, it may be a political act at some other level, but people, they are interested in stories. That stories need to be interesting, whether it comes from Mozambique or Cameroon, or when we do like reading series at the library for kids, but also for adults, and we are reading works by by Shoneyin or by Zuki Swavana. Nobody is saying, oh, are these people South African or Nigerian? It is the stories that they are getting into. And then later on, they are like, so when you mention the name of the writer, oh, I want to read more work by that writer. So if people here in Côte d'Ivoire are knowing about Shoneyin or Zuki Swavana, that means that I, as a translator, I can choose to translate their work and bring it in Côte d'Ivoire and know that people will want to buy, even if it's just 10%. We are 1 billion on this continent. Even if we go for the 10%, just 10% of the population, you know how much sales we will make. you know, how much crossing of books, of literature there will be on a continent. But at the moment, we are thinking, at least in Côte d'Ivoire, our market is France. And, you know, and the French people, they are more interested about, you know, this woman in a polygamous marriage who's managed to escape, you know, about, you know, FGM, because that is like, oh, the exoticism of Africa. So we're not interested about, you know, a woman walking around in a high heels on the streets of Abidjan drinking champagne, because that doesn't make it African. So we need to be building our audience. We need to be building our market. And this goes about, you know, even the languages in which we choose to, you know, to say our stories. Let's write the English that are so, when you read it, you are like, yes, a Nigerian passed through there. When you read the Portuguese, you are like, yeah, a Mozambican was there. You know, we need to be hearing those nuances in our, so that, you know, a Burkinabe person will feel like, yeah, I want to read this work by Sandra Tamale, because, you know, and that's how then we'll be building the audience. That's why I became a translator. That's why I set up the library, to have a place where we have exchange of, you know, of literature. So
Fantastic.
yeah, and that's how we can contribute.
That is true. Absolutely agree with you. Marsha, I'd like to know if we have questions or comments that we can quickly engage with before our time is up.
Yes, sure. So the discussion has been fantastic, by the way. People are really loving it. But I'm going to direct this question at Edwige, although it's not directed at anyone in particular. Are there ways to better circulate African children's literature between different countries without government support? What can individual publishers or actors in the sphere do to better circulate African literature between children's literature between different African countries?
You know, without government, in any case, I don't think any of us are counting on our government. At least I am not. And I think we are doing it a lot. I mean, when Zuki Swavana, who is the mind behind this Afro Young Adult project, you know, wanting to do it, she called me, she called Risha Ali, she called all of these different people to, you know, to read the stories, to facilitate it for her. Sandra and I actually are in conversation, you know, about how we get our literature to each other. We are thinking, you know, bring some demand. We are thinking about how, you know, I can actually contact one of the children story writer and say, can I read this at the library? So, you know, we are doing that already. We are, you know, contacting each other. We know each other, or we know of people who know other people. So, you know, we are doing that already. But at some point, you know, we are citizens or we are not citizens. So, you know, we cannot just give a free pass to our government all the time. Otherwise, why are we paying our taxes?
True.
Not for the Gucci glasses.
What about you, Christian, to direct the same question to you? Are there ways to better circulate children's literature between different African countries without government support?
Yes, I believe there are.
Did we lose Christian?
I think the key challenge transport quite expensive, but in West Africa specific, you know, where someone with a book can directly send it through a traveling agency, a road traveling agency. But aside the existing way, for those who are living in other places, we have this informal way of sending documents. I think many are using that. When one passenger is traveling to another area, they usually, and they have free kilogram, you know, so there are many who are using that way also to send books, but of course, this will mean like not a very high quantity. But I sincerely believe that one of the best way, looking at the current challenges in intra-African movement, will be at the level of co-publishing. Basically, you know, enabling a publisher in a different country where the book is in high demand to publish that book. I think this will highly facilitate the access to that book. So I think publishers and authors, they need to move towards more collaboration, you know, and co-publishing so that their books will be available in many other places. And we have organizations who are working towards that currently.
Fantastic. Marsha, our time is fast spent. Can we still take one more question? We have like 3 minutes left.
Okay, one more question. Sandra, Christiane talked about youth publishing their own stories. Do you as a publisher see more ways to involve kids in different stages of the production of children's literature?
Definitely, I have to agree with him 100%. I live in a community where I see many asymmetries, many inequalities, and I believe that these children here, I'm sorry, my light just went. So there is a huge opportunity to use them in the positive sense, because now they're out of school. And I believe that it's our role, and it's a project that I'm designing. It's called Swimming Upstream, because we live next to a river. So the idea is to involve all these children, because their parents and their grandparents have been livelihood, like smallhold farmers or fishermen or masons, and they don't see a different future for them. So by involving them, showing them that there is a world of literature, there is a world of books, because I've been around books since I was a toddler, but their reality is different. So by introducing books and involving them in this by workshops, we did a workshop with women in April. So we are designing a new one for children specifically. And we believe that by linking this, and we are trying to bridge this with a Brazilian school. So we'll have children from my neighborhood here in Maracuã and Maputo with children in Brazil. They will be exchanging stories, and then they'll have workshops with an illustrator, and then with a writer, and then we will publish this book, and they will own it. And I believe that this will I don't know, inspire them the same way that I was inspired by books I read when I was a kid.
Beautiful.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the questions. Sorry, we can't take further questions. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful session. Thank you to Work It Leads team for giving us this privilege to share our stories and to enlighten people about what is being done in Africa. Africa isn't just home to zebras and baobab trees and Sahara deserts. It's a home to many languages and fantastic minds, and in our diversity, we found our strength. Thank you, Sandra Tameli, for joining us. Thank you, Christiane Elongué, and thank you, Edwige Renée Dro, for joining us too. And I hope that when we reach out to you guys again, you would eat our call. And so it's me saying goodbye from here.